Hello, good morning. Today we're going to be looking at more advanced algorithm scripting challenges, okay? We're going to be doing a record collection, or what we're going to do is take an object, which is going to be something like a song list with albums and all of that data. It's going to be JSON data, and we're going to be updating that based on a function that we're going to write that's going to take in a few arguments. And those arguments are going to be the key value pairs of our object, and so we just need to make sure that everything is updated properly. So it seems pretty basic. We're just going to be taking a look at the object structure itself. So the biggest part of this challenge is really understanding the object structure and being able to access things in the object structure. So notice how the object structure is now nesting. So we have a collection that has an object, and in this main collection object, we have these IDs, or this key, and then the value being a whole object. And then we have a key of a number, then a value being a whole object. And then we have a key here, and a value being this whole object, and then the last key and this whole object. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is update these values. All right, so we're actually given a rather simpler task here where we don't only have to worry about these numbers here, these representative keys for this whole collection. We're not worried about introducing any new numbers, okay? So we're not introducing any key value pairs to this main object. What we're actually looking at is going inside of these values, and these values happen to be an object. And inside of these objects, oops, sorry, touchpad there, we have more key value pairs. And inside of this key, just like we had an object inside of this main one, we now have an array for the songs. So we want to make sure that as we update, if we see tracks, so you take a look at this ABBA Gold album, it doesn't have any tracks, but the tracks key value pair inside of this object, we want that to be an array. So we want these songs to be an array. So how are we going to do this? Well, let's first take a look at things that we're going to need and what we're using. So they've already given us this here to create a copy of the collection called collection copy, where we're going to take this JSON data, this collection, we're going to stringify JSON data. All right, stringify is a method that converts a JavaScript value to a JSON string. All right, so you're basically taking your object that we get from somewhere, all right, and then we're making a string, and then we're going to parse that string. So if you have a JSON string, then you can parse it, all right, and it will construct an object. All right, so we're taking an object, making it a string, a JSON string, then we're taking the JSON string, we're making it an object again, therefore we can make a copy. It seems like there would be an easier way to do that. I just don't know what that is at this point in time. But if you do know, you can always let me know, or if you find out you feel like you want to do some more research on that, I'd be glad to know what that answer is. Why we have to take why I can't just make a straight copy of an object? Why I have to stringify, then parse that? I'm not entirely sure yet, but that'd be good to find out. All right, so let's go over here and take a look at what else we're going to need. We're going to be having tracks we might have to update, so we have to remember our array.prototype.push. All right, and push allows us to push a value to the end of an array. All right, we've used that a bunch of times before, so we can always just push a track directly to this array if we know how to properly identify that in our data structure, which is going to be important. And now we're going to be taking a look at this here, and I'm not sure if we've used this yet, but has own property. And remember, it's not a string or a array prototype. This is actually object prototype. What that means is that we can call has own property on any object itself. All right, and all it is a method that returns a Boolean. All right, remember, true, false, Boolean, whether the object has the specified property. So what is a property? Now remember the key value pairs. All right, so if we take a look at this, where is I'm trying to find something that looks closer to what we have. And what you're really looking for is the key, all right? So we have our property. That's what we're looking for. And then we have a property value. So let's see if name in buzz Okay, so this is a new way to blank in something. I'm not sure if I went over that with you. So let me just go back to here. Essentially, what you're looking at for a property if is the key itself. So that's just identifying the key, and the key value pair is the property. All right, they didn't have a really good visual there that relates directly to ours. So essentially, it is the key. So if we called has own property on this collection, which in our case would actually be collection copy, right? Because we're actually using collection copy. We could say 2548, and we would get a true back. Why? Because 2548 is the key. We actually have a key that says 2548. All right. So we have data we're going to be taking in is in order to traverse this data structure, we're going to be bringing in data, and we're going to be calling that data as ID, property, and value. All right. And again, these right here are just arguments for our function. So we're going to have a function that's going to take in 3 arguments. And those 3 arguments that we're sending in, all right, are going to be the ID, the property, and then the value. Okay. And so in this case, the ID is 1245, the property is tracks, and the value is an empty array. Okay. So it just makes it easier. They've set up this problem for us that way. We can actually clearly define what is the key, what is the value, and understanding that a property and a key is just pretty much the same thing. All right, it's just a way of calling it. The next thing that we have to realize is how do we access data in our data structure here? Now we have a basic ID here. And we can use either a bracket notation or a dot notation to access this. So we can say here, since we're bringing this in as calling this prop, we can use this argument here, prop, to access any of these keys, all right, inside of these numbers, okay, inside of these specific IDs. All right, the property is going to be album, artist, tracks, album, artist, tracks, album, artist, tracks. And then the values itself are going to be the value in those key value pairs. Now, since we are not going to be identifying the specific name or the specific string in most of these, we're not going to be able to use dot notation. Since we're going to be accessing these by an argument, we're going to have to use bracket notation. All right, so we could access something in the in this data structure by saying something like 5439 dot album, all right, and that would actually find the 5439 and then go ahead and find our album, and you can see how it kind of gets deeper and deeper and deeper into our data structure itself. Although we're not going to be doing it, accessing it this way, okay? The way we're going to be accessing this, all right, is we actually have a collection here. So we have this variable collection that we're going to use. All right, so I can just say collection, and here we're using ID, property, and value. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to use bracket notation, and we can say something like ID, property. All right, and the ID, then the property. And if we want to set that equal to something, we can always set it equal to whatever we want. However, if we want to compare it, we can use something like triple equals, and then we can actually find out if there is an then at this point we're going to be looking at this value. So if we're trying to find ABBA gold, we can say something like remember, this is exactly equals. Take one of those out just in case. ABBA gold, right? And that should be true, right? Actually, not capital, but that's going to be true. All right. So let's take a look at this. We're going to mainly be using this bracket notation, and I think we have a link in here. Yeah. So you have this. They actually have your push array here, but there is bracket notation here, and this takes you back all the way back to this right here. We're talking about using bracket notation. So if you remember how to do that one, and I think they gave you another link here somewhere. Manipulating complex objects in JavaScript, and this was another challenge that you did. So you can really take a look at going through this data structure here, and they even gave you some simple code to play with. All right, I know that's a lot of setup for this, but essentially we're going to be using bracket notation to traverse this data structure. So what do we have to do? All right, so let's just, well, what's the question? That's sort of the biggest thing here. All right, so here we go. Basically, if prop is tracks, but the album does not have a tracks property, create an empty array before adding a new value to the album's corresponding property. What they're telling us is that if we want to update, let's say, this ABBA Gold album, and we want to put tracks in, before we can actually input tracks, we need to start with an empty array and then push tracks or push data or songs, we could say, into that tracks array. So the first thing you do is actually create an array for that. All right. So that's something. If the props tracks, the property is tracks and the value isn't empty, all right, push the value into the end of the album's tracks array. So for example here, since we have a tracks array, we could just push that value straight in if they give us a tracks. All right. So how are we going to take care of this? So what we're going to do is say that if so we're just going to have a bunch of conditionals here essentially. So how do we say this? So if the property is tracks, all right, they want us to create an empty array. If the property is tracks and the value isn't empty, so that's pretty simple, right? We can just push a value into it. So that's pretty simple. So let's just say if our property, right, and I think we're, if property, prop here, what do you want to say? Let's see. If the prop is tracks, push the value into the end of the album tracks. If the value is empty, delete the given value. Isn't empty. So what is easy to do? The easiest thing to do here is saying that if we have a property, if the property is equal to tracks, what is this saying? This is saying the property coming in is equal to tracks. So all they're doing is looking at whatever data we're going to update with and see if it is tracks. So we might want to update tracks here for this ABBA Gold. All right. We might want to update this tracks here for this Robert Palmer album that we don't know what it is, but we already have an array here. All right. So we don't have to worry about that. So you see there's all these conditionals that we have to worry about with tracks themselves. All right. But if there is a new property, let's say artist or something, and it has a value, then all we have to do is push that in. And there's no other if-else statements with that one. So that's a pretty simple one. So I think I'm going to start there. It just makes a lot more sense there. So if we have the property being tracks, we have to do other stuff. So the easier thing to do is to say if there's, as long as it's not tracks, all right, meaning anything else besides tracks. And, okay, remember our logic there, double ampersand, and the value, and it has a value. All right. So if it has a value, which means it's not an empty string, you want to do something. All right. And all we have to do here is create a new key value pair inside of here. So that's all we have to do. And luckily, that's pretty easy. We can just say collection, right? And then we just create there. So we can traverse our data structure. ID would be here. Now we need to go inside, right? So we went from ID to property, and then we have now the value, okay? So this value here, all right, we want to set that equal to value. And let's take a look at this real quick. What I am saying is, let's say we input, see this one says artist ABBA. So we can run this simulation since we already have this down here, okay, where we're taking a look at our ID, our artist, All right, and we don't have an artist, so the track is not tracks, but I do have a value. It's not an empty string. So our new output here should add an artist's key value pair, and the value should be ABBA if I run this. Okay, where is that? There it is. I don't know why that does that sometimes, but there you go. It added in artist ABBA. And again, that's a pretty simple one. That's why I started with that. That's pretty much what was set here. Since that's nice and easy to do, pretty simple. All right, so I'm identifying this ID with this property that was brought in, and I'm setting that property equal to that value. Easy. All right. So now, what happens if I have a new track that I want to enter? All right, so that's going to be something. So I'm going to have a few more conditionals because if there's a track that I want to enter, I first have to check if there is an array there. And if there's not an array there, all right, then I have to create an empty array. All right, so how do I do that? All right, so that seems like something like we can do like an else if you want. I'll separate this out to make it a little more readable for you. So else if. All right, else if what? That's going to be else if what? All right, so what's next? We want to start dealing with this whole thing that if these property is equal to tracks, okay? So if the property itself is equal to tracks, so that's just what I showed you before. If the property is equal to tracks, I'm using single quotes, double quotes. It doesn't really matter, right, in this case. That's okay. As long as we have tracks that we want to update, and there's something there, right? As long as there's something there. So again, value is not an empty array. Now, you can see how I've had to add this conditional value empty array, value empty array. So you could restructure this, okay, to do this differently. And you can kind of see it when I get to the bottom of this, how you could restructure this differently. So you wouldn't have to keep repeating this here. So you can see that I have these repeating things. Anytime you see something that repeats, it means there's probably a more efficient way of doing it, right? So here we go. So we have this else if. So what are we doing here now? Well, we have to think about it because we know the property is tracks and we want to add a track in. But if the collection itself, okay, if the album itself, we're calling it this ID, if it already has, okay, if it already has a tracks, I just want to push the track to the end of an array. But if it doesn't have the tracks, like this ABBA here, we need to generate a key value pair and begin with an empty array before we push it in. So we would say something like if the if the collection, okay, which is our object itself, all right, and we can access the ID here. So if the collection ID, whatever this album thing is that we're accessing, all right, we're going to see it. Does it have tracks in it? All right, does it have the thing tracks? How do we ask it that? Well, look at this. Object has own property. It returns true or false. And if I need a true or a false in here, right? So I can just say this has camel case has own property. Luckily, we've named everything easy. So I can say has own property, prop. Okay, so you have this open and close, open, close, right? So this is going to say, does this have a property of tracks? Is tracks there? If it is there, all right, I want to push something. If it's not there, I want to generate an empty array. So how do you say is it not there? Well, look, watch. Whoop. There's no tracks. That's essentially what it says. All right. So remember, here is this bracket. this bracket. Okay, so then I'm going to the bracket here. So we're just gonna be messing with this. So here we go. So what am I going to do in here? So if there's no tracks, all I have to do is I'm going to create tracks. Collection. I keep saying tracks over and over again, I feel like. Collection. All right. So all I want to do is generate ID. Prop. And I'm going to set that equal to an empty array. Okay. So it doesn't have tracks. Now it does, and it's an empty array, and it should look like that. Okay. All right. So right now I know that ABBA doesn't have any tracks, so this should set ABBA here to an empty array. So let's see if this does it. Oh, look, now tracks has an empty array. That's step one. Okay, so remember, I'm still in this else if, then I added another if. Okay, so what I want to do is I didn't return out of this else if statement, so I don't have a return there. So it's going to continue down to this next step. Okay, so I don't need an else because I want to go from here directly into here. All right, because look at this case here with this Robert Palmer. It already has an empty array, so I don't want to overwrite that empty array with something else. I just want to push it in because I already have this if. All right, so I don't want to overwrite that. I don't just want to push in that with a string or anything. I want to see if there is one, and I always want to start with an empty array or an array just to push to. So no matter what now, if I have tracks in there, all I have to do is now update this to push the value. So how would you say that? Remember, there's no return here because I just want to go straight down inside this else if. So collection, I need to access this ID. I need to access the property of that ID. All right. And now we already have that set equal to an array or an empty array. So since at this point I'm down to that last value level that is an array, I could just say push the value. All right. And now we can test this. So I'm going to test this here with the same thing. So now the tracks, notice here was an empty array. Now I made a new track called something. And what did I mess up? Typo. There we go. And now ABBA has a tracks array. And again, I just made that song ABBA, which, I don't know, probably doesn't have a song called ABBA in it, but it doesn't matter. You can see how now this is working, where it's first checking to see if there is an array there. If there's not an array, it's going to create an array. Then it's going to come down and push that value in. All right. So this is the end of this else if. So now we have one more thing to do. And that's just going to say if we pass in here and something that's empty. So right now we have ABBA here has an album. So what do we do if we try to pass in a value that's empty? All right. Right now we're saying we want to delete that key value pair. So what happens if that album, all right, remember I'm still accessing the same key, and I pass that in with an empty string? Well, that says I don't have a value, so I just want to delete that whole thing. So how do I go about doing that? All right. Remember, I am right here. So we have this else if ending right here. So I can just add another else if right inside of here. And all I'm going to be doing is checking the value and seeing if the value is an empty string. Right? If the value is an empty string, all I got to do is delete. What do I want to delete? Now, when I say delete collection, right? ID. Not going to delete the entire collection. All right. Let's see what that does. That should get rid of that. Okay. So let's see what that does if I enter. All right. The town is now red, but what does it look like? Oh, look, I now have deleted that album. All right. So all I did was note that it's going to come down and delete what's right here, the furthest down we are in our data structure. So since I identified the ID, then the property, it deleted from the property and anything that and any value that was attached to it. All right. If I just went like this and I deleted the ID, this is going to be wrong, but that should delete this entire 5439 because it's empty. But we don't want to do that here, but I'm just to show you. Look, it deleted that entire ID or album, however you want to call that, in your record collection. All right, so there we go. So again, the whole thing here, the property from, the whole point here is to go ahead and be able to take a look at and access things in our data structure and be able to update it. All right, so, and we're going to be using bracket notation, which is what we used. So we have a copy of our object just in case. And now we start manipulating our collection. All right, and we have it constantly getting updated here based on the key value pairs. One stipulation being that we're not even messing with updating any IDs, but you can kind of see how we would do that again. And now just take a look at this. See how now else if this value is an empty string? You see how this value an empty string or value not an empty string, value not an empty string? You could probably see how we could restructure this a little bit better. You could actually start with this value here being an empty string and deleting it. Therefore, you wouldn't even need these here, because if it is empty, right, if you started with this, then the else ifs would say, okay, the value has something in it. So you could do that at the top, and then you could eliminate these and value not empty, which would actually save you time in code and be a little more efficient. But again, I'll leave that up to you to try to work that out for yourself. Hopefully that makes sense to you what I'm saying, because it'll be a little bit more efficient that way. Alrighty, so again, hopefully this was helpful for you all, and I'll be back next time, and we're going to try to work through the rest of these problems here. So I will see you next time.